For more than 170 years, Louisiana historians have purposely avoided an oddity in the parish records of East Baton Rouge. In March 1845, 17 plantation ledgers were changed at the same time. Each one recorded the sale of one enslaved man whose physical description broke all the rules of the antebellum South. What made officials in 3 parishes destroy their letters about this person? Why did 7 well-known families leave their homes within 18 months of his arrival? The answer is hidden in private diaries that a court ordered to be sealed until 1945. And what those pages say about desire, power, and the carefully planned lies of Southern society will make you question everything you thought you knew about that horrible time. Before we go on with the story of what happened when beauty became a weapon in the most unlikely hands, I need you to do something for me. This channel tells you the darkest secrets that America tried to forget, so hit that subscribe button now. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, like a city or state. I want to find out where all the other mystery fans are. Let's talk about a truth that was so dangerous that it almost tore apart the whole social fabric of Louisiana's capital region. The things that would shake Baton Rouge to its core didn't start in Louisiana. They started in a Charleston auction house, where people were displayed like livestock, and one man's looks would be more damaging than any rebellion. In 1844, Charleston was the center of the domestic slave trade. People made money by systematically cataloging and selling human flesh. The Ryan's Mart auction house was a 3-story building with iron-bound windows on the corner of Chalmers and State Streets. Since 1818, it had sold more than 40,000 people. The auction block had been worn smooth by years of bare feet. The wood was darkened by sweat and tears, and the stains of human suffering that no amount of scrubbing could get rid of. On a September morning when the heat felt like a heavy weight, something strange happened here. Horace Van Amen, the auctioneer, had 26 years of experience judging human merchandise and was proud of it. However, he found it hard to judge something that went against his professional judgment. The ledger said that the man who was being sold as a slave was named Jules, was about 23 years old, and belonged to the estate of the late Edgar Fontaine in Beaufort. Standard notation would usually include marks, scars, skills, and temperament. However, Van Amen's entry had something new. A full paragraph describing physical traits, followed by a note that said, "Buyer discretion strongly advised. Household placement only. Fieldwork inadvisable due to attention factor." Anyone who looked at Jules right away could see what made him special. His features had a symmetry that was almost mathematical in its accuracy. High cheekbones that caught the light, eyes that were unusually clear and set below a strong brow, and a jawline that sculptors might spend years trying to capture in marble. His skin was smooth and clear, and his body looked strong without being brutish. But it wasn't just physical traits that made experienced traders uneasy. His eyes showed intelligence, and his quiet dignity seemed to mock the chains he wore. The Fontaine estate kept Jules alone for most of his life, mostly using him as a house servant and carefully controlling who he talked to. Later, estate documents would show that Edgar Fontaine had noticed early on that Jules's appearance was causing problems, and had put strict rules in place to keep things from getting worse. But Fontaine's death meant that assets had to be sold, and Jules had to go into the general market for the first time in his life. Van Amen had never seen anything like the bidding that morning. A number of well-known planters made aggressive bids, then suddenly pulled out. 2 buyers got into a fight over how to bid. A woman in the observer's gallery passed out and had to be carried out. The final price was $1,200, which was almost 3 times what a prime field hand would normally cost. An agent bought it for an anonymous buyer from Louisiana. Matthias Devaux, the head of the Devaux plantation and one of the most profitable sugar estates in the Baton Rouge area, was the buyer. Devoux was 53 years old and a widower. He had made his money by being ruthlessly smart and knowing exactly how the social systems that kept his world going worked. Nathaniel and Marcus, his two sons, are 24 and 21 years old, and Catherine and Elise, his two daughters, are 19 and 16 years old. The Devoux plantation was 3,000 acres of prime Mississippi River bottomland that 218 people worked as slaves. The main house was a Greek Revival work of art with 16 rooms, 6 huge columns across the front gallery, and gardens that had been in Southern Cultivator magazine. Everything about the estate gave the impression of order, wealth, and unbreakable control. Matthias Devoux bought Jules without seeing him first, only going by what the Charleston agent said and one daguerreotype. People would guess a lot about why he made this choice, but letters that survived show that Devoux thought he knew exactly what he was buying and how to handle it. For 30 years, he had been in charge of every part of his life. He had no reason to think this purchase would be any different. Jules got to the Devoux plantation in early October 1844. He took a steamboat and then a wagon along the river road. It took 11 days to get there. He didn't say much, didn't eat much, and his face stayed blank, which didn't give away what he was thinking. The overseer who went with him wrote in his report that Jules was unnaturally calm, adding that he shows no signs of resistance or emotion. Condition excellent. Potential value high if managed correctly. Matthias Devoux's first plan was simple. Jules would work as a personal valet, which would keep him mostly in the main house and away from the other slaves. This separation was very important. Devoux knew that any kind of beauty was a threat to the strict rules that kept plantation life running smoothly. A beautiful, enslaved woman was a well-known problem. The social order didn't have any rules for dealing with a beautiful enslaved man. For the first 3 months, the plan seemed to work. Jules did his job well, taking care of Matthias's clothes, getting his shaving kit ready every morning, and being with him during business meetings. He was basically invisible, there, but not really there, doing his job without causing any problems. But it turned out that being invisible was impossible. The first signs of trouble came from the Devoux family themselves. Catherine, the 19-year-old daughter, started asking Jules for help with less and less important things, like adjusting curtains in rooms he had no business being in, getting books from the library when house slaves were available, and delivering messages that any servant could have done. Elise, her younger sister, started showing up in the rooms where Jules was working and making excuses to stay longer. Nathaniel, the oldest son, reacted in a different way. At dinner, he started talking about how important it was to keep house slaves in their place and that some people should be moved to field work. Marcus, his brother, was quieter by nature and didn't say much, but he watched Jules with a look that showed both interest and barely hidden anger. But the reaction that worried me the most came from someone who didn't live in the Devoux house. Vivian Desamp was 28 years old and married to Laurent Desamp, who owned the nearby Oak Grove plantation. The Desamp estate was smaller than the Devoux holdings, but it made just as much money. The two families kept up the complicated social dance of neighboring planters, which included formal dinners, joint hunting trips, and carefully planned visiting rules. Vivian was thought to be one of the most beautiful women in the parish. She was a former socialite from New Orleans, and her marriage to Laurent was the biggest event of the 1839 social season. During a Christmas week dinner at the Devoux house in December 1844, she first met Jules. He was serving wine and walking through the dining room with the right amount of respect. For maybe 2 seconds, their eyes met. Vivian's hand shook, and wine spilled onto the white tablecloth. The stain spread slowly, and it was dark against the linen, like blood. From then on, something that couldn't be changed started. Vivian began to visit the Davu plantation more often than usual, always with a good reason. Talking to Catherine about garden plans, talking to Matthias about business matters that affected both estates, or borrowing books from the Davu library. But the servants noticed that her visits always happened when Jules was around, that her eyes followed him as he moved through rooms, and that she found ways to make sure they ran into each other. Laurent Desamp also saw it. He was not a stupid man, and he knew that his wife was going into a dangerous area. He met with Matthias Davu in private in January 1845. There is no record of what they talked about, but witnesses say that Laurent left the meeting with a stiff look on his face and his jaw so tight that a vein throbbed at his temple. Matthias moved Jules from house service to the plantation's carpentry shop a week later. The shop is a big building that is 200 yards from the main house. It was a smart move to keep Jules on the property but make him less visible, especially to women in the household and women who came to visit. Abraham, an enslaved man who had been building furniture and taking care of plantation buildings for 15 years, ran the carpentry shop. Abraham was in his late 40s and was a practical survivor who knew the unspoken rules that kept him alive and safe in his job. He knew right away what was wrong when he saw Jules. Abraham told Jules on his first day at work, "You're going to get people killed. Do you get that? Just by being here, you're a loaded gun." Jules didn't say anything. He had known for a long time that not talking could keep him safe. Abraham sighed and gave Jules a plane to smooth out the wood. "Don't look anyone in the eye unless you have to, and for God's sake stay away from the main house when there are visitors." But it was getting harder and harder to stay hidden because the problem was spreading beyond individual attraction to something that could threaten the whole social structure. In the first week of February 1845, Louisiana had a cold snap that was unusual for the state. At night, temperatures dropped into the 20s, and frost formed delicate patterns on windows all over the parish. The cold made everyone grumpy, messed up their schedules, and made people stay inside closer together than they usually did on a plantation. Matthias Davu hosted a business dinner for 5 planters and their wives on February 9th. The goal was to talk about working together to deal with recent abolitionist literature that had been spreading through New Orleans. This literature was making people afraid of slave rebellions and Northern interference. These meetings happened a lot because Southern planters were working together to deal with what they saw as threats to their way of life. Jules shouldn't have been at this gathering, but the regular house staff was sick and short-staffed. So, Matthias decided to bring Jules in for a short time to help serve. It was a calculated risk based on need, and it would turn out to be a terrible mistake. Laurent and Vivian Desamp arrived with the guests at 6 o'clock. Charles and Eugenia Broussard, who own Magnolia Grove Plantation. Robert and Sarah Beaumont, who own Oakwood Estate. Thomas Hartwell, a widower from Bellefonte Plantation, and Dr. Marcus Clayton and his wife Helen, who own a smaller property called Cedar Hill, were all at the party. The evening started out like any other. Bourbon and conversation in the parlor, talk about sugar prices and river trade, and carefully controlled small talk that didn't give anything away but assessed everything. Jules moved through these areas like a shadow, filling glasses, taking away empty plates, and keeping up the invisible presence that good service needed. But there was something different. The women were looking at him. Vivian Desamp's gaze was the most intense, but Eugenia Broussard and Sarah Beaumont were also looking at her. Helen Clayton, the doctor's wife, kept her eyes averted on purpose, but her stiff posture and red cheeks showed that she was aware. The men felt this attention, and the mood in the room started to turn sour. The food was ready at 8 o'clock. Jules and another house slave named Thomas stood by the wall, ready to help with any requests. The talk turned to business, how to fight abolitionist propaganda, recent laws, and whether Louisiana should make its laws about the education of enslaved people stronger. Laurent Desamp drank a lot more than the other men. His eyes kept going back and forth between his wife and Jules, figuring out angles and distances. Vivian was sitting right across from her husband, and she wasn't eating much. She was pushing food around her plate and keeping a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. Laurent suddenly interrupted a conversation about cotton futures to say, "I've been meaning to say that I think we should think about making stricter rules about which slaves can be in mixed company. I mean, house service privileges. Some people are more trouble than they're worth." The table was quiet. Everyone knew he was talking about Jules, who was standing still against the wall with a blank look on his face. Matthias Devu put his fork down carefully. "Laurent, are you saying that I don't know how to take care of my own property?" "I'm saying that some kinds of property have problems that are different from others and need different solutions. You know what I mean." "I know you've had too much bourbon, and you're being rude in my house." Vivian's face turned white. She reached across the table as if to touch her husband's arm, but then she changed her mind. "Please, Laurent." "Please what?" Laurent's voice was getting louder. "Please pretend we're not all thinking the same thing. Please act like it's normal to have that," he said, pointing to Jules without looking at him. "It's parading around where decent women have to look at him." Charles Broussard cleared his throat. "Maybe we should go to the parlor for cigars and let the women drink their coffee in peace." Laurent wasn't done yet, though. He stood up quickly, and the chair scraped against the floor. "Do you want to know what really threatens our way of life? It's not abolitionists in Boston or slave rebellions. It's this," he said, pointing right at Jules. "It's pretending that we can keep things in order when we let things get out of hand. That creature should be in the fields where he belongs, not serving dinner to our wives." "Sit down, Laurent." Matthias's voice was cold and quiet. "Now what? Are you going to defend your pet's honor? We all know why you bought him. We've heard the stories from Charleston. You thought you could control this, but you can't. Look at what's already happening." Thomas Hartwell, who was a widower, got up. "Guys, this isn't the right time to talk about dinner. Whatever problems you have should be worked out in private." But the harm had already been done. The night was broken beyond repair. The dinner party ended soon after, with guests leaving early and saying strained goodbyes and promising to talk again later. As Vivian Desamp was leaving, she looked back once and saw Jules in the dark hallway. It was impossible to tell what she was feeling. Desperation, longing, guilt, anger, all mixed up. Laurent saw that face. Everyone saw it. The next day, Jules was no longer allowed to do any chores around the house. Matthias told him to work full-time in the carpentry shop and made it clear that he was not to go into the main house at any time. Abraham was in charge of watching Jules and making sure he didn't talk to anyone other than the people who worked with him. "You see what you've done," Abraham said, not in a mean way. "You didn't do anything, and that's the problem. Your face is doing all the damage." Finally, Jules spoke. His voice was soft and educated in a way that made it sound like he had been trained carefully. "I know what I am. I've always known. There's no way to fix it. Well, we better find one because this is just the start." Abraham was correct. In just 2 weeks, 3 things happened that showed how quickly things were getting worse. First, Catherine DeVoe broke off an informal engagement to the son of a well-known Natchez family. There was no explanation, but her father's rage shook the whole house. She had thrown away a match that would have helped her socially for no clear reason, and Matthias knew it had something to do with Jules, even though he couldn't prove it. Second, A slave named David, who worked on the Oak Grove plantation which belonged to Laurent Desamp, was found beaten almost to death in the quarters. When he woke up, he told a story about how he had been caught with a note. He tore up the note instead of showing what it said, but witnesses said they saw him near the Devoe property line earlier that day. It was clear what the message meant. Someone at Oak Grove was trying to get in touch with someone at Devoe Plantation, and Laurent Desamp had responded with his usual violence. Third, and most worryingly, Vivienne Desamp stopped going to social events. For 2 weeks, she was just missing from the well-planned social life of the planter class. Her husband gave vague reasons for her health, but servants from Oak Grove told stories to their counterparts on other plantations. Vivienne was kept in her room, watched all the time, had her letters read, and couldn't move around freely. In a way, she was a prisoner in her own home. This was the situation when something never seen before happened. It turned a private scandal into a public crisis and made every planter in the parish face questions they had been avoiding their whole lives. On the morning of March 3, 1845, a Monday that was bright and cold, Abraham went to the carpentry shop and found Jules already there, sitting on the floor with his back against the workbench. He had his eyes open, but it looked like he was staring at nothing. Abraham said, "You didn't sleep." There wasn't a question. "I dreamed about Charleston," Jules said. "I dreamed about the auction block and all the eyes looking at me like I was a horse they were thinking about buying. When I woke up, I realized that nothing had changed. Different eyes, same transaction. I'm still merchandise. The only thing that matters is what kind of merchandise I am and how much different buyers are willing to pay for me." Abraham sat down next to him, and his old joints creaked. "You're smart. How did that happen?" The Fontaine family in Beaufort. They had ideas about how to make slaves worth more by giving them selective education. They taught me to read, write, and speak properly. They even taught me French because they thought it would make me more valuable as a house property. They never thought that education might make me think, or that thinking might make everything worse. "You're dangerous," Abraham said. "That's a combination this world isn't ready for. A man who looks and thinks like you. I never wanted this face. Nobody asks for anything. We just take what we get and try to make it through." They sat in silence for a while, listening to birds in the trees outside and the sounds of plantation life starting its daily routine in the distance. Then Abraham said something that would later seem like a sign. "You know what's going to happen, right? Someone is going to do something dumb. Not you, because you're too smart for that, but someone who wants you, someone who's afraid of you, or someone who thinks you represent something that needs to be destroyed. And when they do, it'll be bad for everyone." He looked at Jules. "What's next?" "Stay hidden. That's the only way to stay safe." Vivienne Desamp had made a choice that would destroy the carefully maintained facade of order that held plantation society together, so invisibility was no longer possible. Vivienne left Oak Grove Plantation on the afternoon of March 7th, when Laurent was in New Orleans for work. She didn't tell her staff or take a carriage. She just walked out of her house, across the fields that separated Oak Grove from Devoe property, through a part of the woods that ran along the property line, and right to the carpentry shop where Jules worked. She got there just before the sun went down. Abraham was the only other person there, and he was finishing up an inventory of supplies. He looked up and saw Vivienne Desamp standing in the doorway. Her dress was dirty from the walk. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her eyes were fixed on Jules with a look that made Abraham's blood run cold. "I need to talk to him," she said, "by myself." "Ma'am, I can't let that happen. Mr. Devoe would kill me, and your husband would probably kill me too. Please go home." "I'm not going." Jules stood up slowly. "Mrs. Desamp, no matter what you think. Stop talking, she said, her voice shaking. I have to say something. If I don't say it now, I'll never say it. For 6 months, I've been trying to convince myself that what I'm feeling isn't real, that it's just some temporary madness that will go away if I stay away from you. But it hasn't gone away. It's gotten worse. And I realize that I have 2 choices. I can live the rest of my life in that house, married to a man I don't love, pretending everything is fine and slowly dying inside. Or I can admit the truth. Abraham said softly, the truth is going to get people killed. With you. I don't care anymore. It was hard to read Jules's face. You don't mean that. I do. I mean it completely. I've never meant anything more in my life. I'm leaving everything. My marriage, my social standing, and my family's reputation. I need you to come with me right now. We can get to New Orleans by morning if we take the river. From there, we can go to Mexico, California, or anywhere else they won't find us. There was complete silence after that. It looked like Abraham wanted to disappear into the walls. Jules stood still, and for the first time since he got to the Davu plantation, his carefully controlled calmness broke. You know what you're asking is impossible. Nothing is impossible if you really want it. Mrs. Desamp, I'm a slave. The legal term is property. You can't run away with property. That's called theft. They would hunt us down, find us, and kill me in ways you can't imagine. And you, your life would be over in every way that matters. Your family would disown you. Society would destroy you. And for what? For freedom. For choice. For something real instead of the show we all have to put on every day. Slowly, Jules shook his head. That's not freedom. That's a pretty fantasy that ends in violence. I've seen what happens to enslaved men who are accused of touching white women inappropriately. I've heard the stories. There are things worse than death, and Southern justice is good at them. Then what do we do? Act like this isn't happening? That's exactly what we do. You go back to your husband, and I stay here. We never talk again. That's the only way we all get through this. Vivian's face was a mix of anger and despair. I can't do that. I can't go back to that life. You don't know what it's like. I don't get what it's like to be trapped, to not be able to control your own body, your own future, or even your own basic humanity. Jula's voice was rising for the first time. I've been a slave my whole life. You've only been stuck in social norms for a few years. It's not the same thing, and pretending it is makes this whole conversation disgusting. Abraham had backed up to the door and was ready to run if he had to. The talk had gone too far and could have gotten them all killed. Vivian was crying now, and her face was wet with tears. I thought maybe. You're wrong. Go home. Forget you came here. Forget we ever talked. If anyone asks, say you went for a walk and got lost. Make up any story you need to, but don't ever come back here. She stood there for what felt like forever, her body shaking with silent tears. Then she turned around and walked out into the darkening night, disappearing into the trees without looking back. Abraham and Jules stood in the quiet store for a long time. Abraham finally said, You know this isn't over. I know. She's going to tell someone. Maybe not on purpose, but at some point, it's going to come out. And when it does, I'll be dead in one way or another. But neither of them knew that the story had already started to spread, thanks to the one witness they hadn't thought of. A slave woman named Ruth from the Oak Grove plantation, who had been following Vivian from a distance because she was worried about her mistress's strange behavior. Ruth had watched Vivian go into the carpentry shop. She had heard people yelling, but she couldn't make out the words. Ruth followed Vivian back to Oak Grove when she came out crying. She told the head housewoman what she had seen right away, and the head housewoman told the overseer, who told Laurent Desamp as soon as he got back from New Orleans. Within a day, everyone in the parish knew that Vivian Desamp had gone to see Jules by herself. As the story spread, it changed. Some versions had them hugging. Some people said that Jules violently turned her down. Some people even made up long conversations about running away together. None of the versions were correct, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that a wealthy white woman had secretly sought out a slave man, and the consequences of that would tear the community apart. Laurent Desamp answered quickly and in front of everyone. On March 9th, he asked the parish court to look into bad behavior on the Devou plantation. He specifically named Jules as a threat to public morality and order. The petition was very unusual. A master basically accused another master of not properly controlling enslaved property, which made private plantation business a legal matter that could be made public. Matthias Devou responded with his own petition, saying that Laurent was lying about him and asking that the issue be settled through private arbitration. But the harm had already been done. The case was going to go on, and everyone involved would have to testify under oath about things that polite society pretended didn't exist. It was set for March 25th. In the 2 weeks that followed, the tensions that had been building for months began to explode in ways that no one could have foreseen. If you're feeling the same tension and need to know what happened next, please hit the like button. Leave a comment with your ideas on how this could end, and make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take some crazy turns that will make you question what it means to be human. Now, let's talk about what happened when the trial started, and how secrets that should have stayed hidden came to light. In the days leading up to the trial, the parish became a pressure cooker of rumors, fear, and violence that was barely kept under control. What started as a private scandal was turning into a public spectacle that threatened to reveal the deep flaws in plantation society. Matthias Devou knew he was fighting a war on many fronts. Taking care of his own home was his top priority, and it was falling apart under the pressure. Catherine had completely stopped talking to him. She ate her meals in her room and refused to go to any social events. Nathaniel and Marcus were openly fighting about what to do about the problem. Nathaniel wanted Jules to be sold right away to someone in Texas or Mississippi, which would solve the problem completely. Marcus, on the other hand, thought they could use the trial to ruin Laurent Desamp's reputation and credibility. Elise, the youngest daughter, had reacted to the crisis in a way that no one expected. She went to church services twice a day and prayed with a zeal that was almost fanatical. When people asked her what she was praying for, she would only say, "The truth. I'm praying that the truth comes out, whatever it is." At the same time, Jules had been moved from the carpentry shop to a locked storage room in the barn, where he was kept for his own safety. Abraham brought him food twice a day and said that Jules spent his time reading. Matthias had let him read books, maybe because he felt bad about it, or because he still thought that education was important for property. Jules read poetry, philosophy, and history. Abraham didn't know what he was getting ready for, but he was. Things were even more unstable at Oak Grove Plantation. Vivian hadn't left her room since the fight at the carpentry shop. Servants said they heard her crying at night and sometimes talking to herself. Laurent drank from morning to night, and his face was always red. He moved jerkily with rage that was hard to control. He had a loaded gun on his desk and another in his bedroom. More than one person who came to see him said he looked like he was waiting for a reason to use them. The larger community of planters was split. Some people backed Laurent because they thought Matthias had clearly failed to keep his property safe and let a dangerous situation develop. Others supported Matthias, saying that Laurent's public lawsuit went against the unwritten rule that plantation business should stay private. A third group tried to stay out of it, but as the trial date got closer, they had to take sides. Judge Edmund Thibodeau of the parish court, who would be in charge of the hearing, was 62 years old and had been in Louisiana politics for 40 years, carefully navigating the dangerous waters of planter society. He knew that this case would force him to make decisions that would make half of the parish angry, no matter what he chose. His private journal, which was found decades later, showed how he thought, March 15th, 1845. I have before me a case that shows everything wrong with our strange institution and why we can't talk about those wrongs in public. Laurent Desamps has accused Matthias Devaux of gross negligence in managing an enslaved man whose looks have attracted the wrong kind of attention from white women of quality. Everyone knows the accusation is true. But to rule in Laurent's favor would mean admitting that our carefully constructed racial hierarchy can be broken by something as simple as beauty, that our white women are not naturally superior to enslaved men by the natural order we claim governs our society. To rule in Matthias's favor would mean denying Laurent justice for a legitimate grievance and possibly encouraging more disorder. There is no good outcome. I pray for wisdom, but I fear what wisdom will demand. 3 new things made an already impossible situation even more complicated as the trial date got closer. The first one came from a place I didn't expect. Dr. Marcus Clayton, who had been at the terrible dinner party, came up to Matthias with a private offer. "I've been thinking about how this case might affect other things," Clayton said. They were meeting in Matthias's study, which was away from family and servants. "What we're really dealing with is a question of classification. How do we categorize an enslaved person whose physical characteristics disrupt our standard frameworks? I believe there's a scientific approach to this. What kind of scientific approach?" Matthias was tired, and his face showed all 53 years of his life. Anthropological documentation, measurements, daguerreotypes, detailed physical assessments. If we can show that Jules is an anomaly, a genetic aberration that doesn't fit into normal categories, then any problems that come up are because of his unusual nature, not your management. You couldn't have known that buying him would cause these problems because his condition is so rare that it has never happened before. Matthias thought about this. "Do you want to make him a medical oddity?" "I want to give you a defense that doesn't require you to admit fault. Laurent's point is that you should have known Jules would cause problems. My point is that his effect on observers is a new phenomenon that no reasonable person could have predicted. It was, in its own strange way, brilliant. Matthias could avoid taking the blame by framing Jules as a scientific oddity. At the same time, this would reinforce the idea that Jules was fundamentally different, and not a representative of any larger truths about enslaved people or the society that enslaved them." "Do it," Matthias said. "You can have any papers you need." The second development came from Catherine Devaux, who spoke up in the most dramatic way possible. 5 days before the trial, on March 20th, she went to her father and told him something that would change everything he thought he knew about the case. "I have to tell you something," she said. The lace curtains let in early morning light, and they were in the parlor. "About Jules, about why I ended my engagement." Matthias felt like his stomach had dropped. "Catherine, whatever you say next." "I'm not in love with him, Father. That's not what this is about. I broke off my engagement because I realized that if I married Richard Fitton, I would be making the same choice Mother made. I'd be trading my life for social position and financial security, and I'd spend the next 40 years pretending to be happy while dying inside. Jules didn't seduce me. He opened my eyes. I don't get it. I was in the hallway outside the carpentry shop when Vivian DeSamp came to see him. I heard their whole conversation. I heard her offer to throw everything away for him, and I heard him say no. Do you know what he said? He said that being stuck by social norms for a few years isn't the same as being a slave for your whole life. And he was right. But here's what I realized. The same system that enslaves him also enslaves us. Maybe our cages are prettier, but we're still stuck. Matthias sat down with a thud. You can't talk like that. Why not? Because it's dangerous? Because it threatens everything we pretend is natural and right? Father, you bought Jules thinking you could control the situation, but you can't. Not because he's done anything wrong, but because his mere existence forces people to ask questions they're not supposed to ask, including me. So what are you saying? You want to give up your job, your family, and your whole future because a slave made you think about philosophy? I don't know what I want anymore, and that's scary, but it's also the first time in years that I've been honest with myself. Catherine left the room before her father could say anything. Matthias sat by himself for a long time, feeling like everything he had built his life on was shifting. It was scary to realize that his daughter was right. The third event happened on March 22nd, 3 days before the trial, and it would set off everything that happened after that. Benjamin, a slave from the Brizard plantation, came to Devou estate in the middle of the night, covered in blood and barely awake. He had been beaten, stabbed twice, and left for dead, but somehow he was able to crawl and stumble the 4 miles to the Devou main house. Abraham was sent to the slave quarters where Benjamin had been taken. He got there to find the plantation's doctor, not Dr. Clayton, but another doctor named Arno, who took care of the health of the slaves, working frantically to stop the bleeding. Benjamin was out of his mind, going in and out of consciousness, but he kept saying the same thing. They're coming for him. Tell him they're coming. Who is coming? Abraham asked. Who did this to you, Benjamin? Benjamin's eyes were only on one thing for a moment. Tell Jules, warn Jules. The group, the ones who meet at Belafonte, are planning something for tomorrow night. They want to end this their own way, can't let it go to trial. After that, Benjamin passed out. He would die 2 hours later without getting it back. Abraham went straight to Matthias Devou and woke him up in the middle of the night. He said everything Benjamin had said again, and Matthias's face went pale. Belafonte, that's Thomas Hartwell's plantation. What group is Benjamin talking about? I don't know what it is, but they're going to do something to Jules before the trial. We need to get him out of here. Matthias made up his mind. Get Jules and put him in the root cellar under the main house. Lock it up and don't tell anyone where he is, not even my sons. Then find out everything you can about what Benjamin was talking about. Abraham did what he was told and moved Jules from the barn storage room to the hidden root cellar that had been built decades earlier. It was meant to store vegetables, but it was really built as a hiding place during the 1811 slave rebellion panic. Jules didn't fight back or ask questions. He just went where he was told, carrying the books Matthias had given him. Why are you protecting me? Jules asked Matthias, who had come down to the cellar himself. Just sell me and send me away. That would fix everything. Matthias looked at the slave who had messed up his carefully planned life. Laurent DeSamp is trying to ruin my reputation in public, and I won't let him. This case is going to set precedents that will affect every planter in Louisiana, and those precedents need to be in our favor, and because— He stopped. Jules stayed put. And because you were right at that dinner party, Matthias finally said. You were completely right when you told Vivian that social convention isn't the same as enslavement. That makes me mad because it means I have to admit that everything I've built is based on lies. So I'm going to protect you, not because I'm kind, but because the other option is to admit that everything I've built is based on lies." "At least you're being honest about it," Jewel said softly. "All I have left is honesty." Matthias left the cellar, which was locked and barred from the outside, and went to get ready for what was coming. What happened was worse than anyone thought it would be. It was gray and cold on the morning of March 23rd. A low fog rolled off the Mississippi River and settled over the plantation like a shroud. The day before, Abraham had been doing some research by carefully asking questions in the quarters and talking to slaves from other plantations when they were moving between properties. What he found confirmed Benjamin's dying warning. There was a group, and they meant to kill. They called themselves the Committee for Preservation of Natural Order, but that name wasn't used very often. Most of the time, they were just the committee, a secret group of planters and their friends who had formed in response to growing pressure from abolitionists and fears of slave uprisings. They met once a month in a locked room above Thomas Hartwell's carriage house at Belfonte Plantation, which was his estate. At least 15 well-known men from the parish were members, and their job was to coordinate responses to any threats to the plantation system in ways that couldn't be made public. Laurent Desamps had brought the Jules situation to the committee, saying that it was not just a personal problem, but a serious threat to social order. His point was simple. If a slave could cause trouble just by how he looked, and that trouble was allowed to continue without strong action, it would set a bad example that would encourage other people to fight against white supremacy. Laurent said that the trial was too public and too risky. There were too many things that could go wrong, and too many ways for embarrassing truths to come out. It's best to fix the problem directly, quietly, and for good. The committee had voted, and 12 members were in favor of Laurent's plan. 3 people were against it, but promised not to get involved. The committee would act on the night of March 23rd. Abraham told Matthias everything, and Matthias understood right away what it meant. The committee had no plans to attack during the day or in a legal way. They were going to attack, probably in the middle of the night, and make it look like an accident or a random act of violence. Jules would go missing, and his body would probably never be found. Any investigation would probably be quietly stopped. The trial would be called off because the person who was supposed to be there wasn't there, and life would go back to normal. But Matthias couldn't let that happen. Not because he cared about Jules as a person, he still couldn't make that leap, but because letting the committee work on his land without his permission would show that he was weak, and that other planters could ignore his authority. The principle was more important than the person. Abraham said, "We need to move him again. Get him off the property completely, send him down the river, sell him to someone in New Orleans before nightfall." No, Matthias thought, his mind going through the options with the strategic thinking that had made him rich. If we run, we admit guilt. If we hide, we look cowardly. We need to face this head-on. Face 12 armed men who are planning murder. Face them with the law, with witnesses, and with publicity, which is exactly what they're trying to avoid. Matthias sent urgent messages to Judge Thibodeau, the parish sheriff, and a few planters he knew were not on the committee. He asked for help right away because he thought there was a threat to property and civil order. He didn't say anything about Jules in particular. He said it was information about a possible raid on his estate by people he didn't know who might be trying to hurt his interests before the trial. The DeVoe plantation had turned into an armed camp by the afternoon. 3 deputies and the sheriff had come. Judge Thibodeau had sent his clerk to watch and write down anything that happened. 6 planters from nearby who didn't agree with the committee had come with their overseers, supposedly to help protect Matthias's property. The message was clear. Any attack on the DeVoe plantation would be seen, recorded, and treated as a crime. The committee's plans had been ruined by the very publicity they were trying to avoid. But Laurent Desamp, who was drunk and full of rage and shame, made a choice that would turn the fight from a secret mission into a public disaster. He showed up at the Devaux estate at 8 o'clock that night, not with the committee, but by himself, openly carrying his gun and asking to see Matthias. The sheriff and Judge Thibodeau were there to see the two men meet in the front parlor. Laurent could barely speak. His words were slurred, but his rage was clear. He said to Matthias, "You did this. You brought that thing into our community. You knew what it was and what it would do, but you did it anyway. You ruined my marriage and made my wife look like a fool. You've made all of us look like fools who can't control our own homes." Matthias said coldly, "Your marriage was over long before Jules came. Maybe you should think about whether the problem is with your property management or with you." Laurent's hand went to his gun. The sheriff stepped forward right away. "Mr. Desamp, I'm going to need you to give up that gun. This is just between him and me. This is a legal matter, and there will be a trial in 2 days. Put the gun down." What happened next happened so quickly that later stories would be very different. Laurent took out his gun. The sheriff pulled out his own gun. Laurent didn't look at Matthias or the sheriff. Instead, he turned toward the hallway that led to the back of the house. He might have thought that Jules was hiding somewhere easy to find. Matthias yelled something. The sheriff shot. The bullet hit Laurent in the shoulder and turned him around. He let go of his gun and held the wound, blood spreading across his shirt. He looked at Matthias in disbelief, and then said something that would be written down in legal documents and private journals for years. "This is what you've chosen. This is what we've all become. This is what happens when we admit that our system can be destroyed by a single, beautiful face. We're already dead, all of us. We just don't know it yet." Then he fell down. Laurent lived through the shooting, but he would no longer be able to use his right arm. But the event effectively put an end to the committee's plans for direct action and made sure that the trial would go exactly as Matthias wanted, in public, with official witnesses, and with all evidence documented. Laurent had gone from being the accuser to trying to kill someone, which hurt his own case and made Matthias look like the defender of law and order. But Matthias was about to find out that the truth was much more complicated than he thought. The trial of Desamp versus Devaux started on March 25, 1845, in the parish courthouse, which was a brick building with tall windows that let in soft morning light. There were a lot of people in the courtroom. There were people standing along the walls and in the gallery, which was full of people. This wasn't just a court case. It was a mix of theater, scandal, and social unrest. Judge Thibodeau started by setting some rules. This was technically a civil case because Laurent was suing Matthias for damages caused by his careless management of property. However, everyone knew that it was really a trial about power, desire, race, and the basic structures that held Southern society together. Laurent, with his arm in a sling, told his side of the story through his lawyer, a man with a sharp face named Gideon Cross. The case was simple. Matthias Devaux had bought a slave whose unusual physical traits made him unfit for regular plantation work. Matthias should have dealt with this situation better by keeping Jules completely alone or selling him to someone far away. Instead, he let Jules interact with free, high-quality women, which led to moral corruption and chaos at home. Laurent's marriage had suffered. His wife's reputation had been ruined, and the larger community was at risk of being contaminated in the same way. Cross called a number of witnesses to back up this claim. Dr. Marcus Clayton talked about the unique physical traits he had recorded, showing detailed measurements and observations that made Jules seem like a biological oddity. Eugenia Broussard, Charles Broussard's wife, admitted under questioning that Jules's presence at the bad dinner party had distracted her inappropriately. Thomas Hartwell talked about worries that had been brought up at committee meetings about possible threats to social order. Vivian DeSamp's own testimony was the most damaging, though. She looked like she was in her 50s when she took the stand. Her face was pale and drawn, and her hands shook when she put them on the Bible to swear her oath. Her testimony was quiet and shaky, but it was very damning. I went to see him because I thought I was in love. I thought what I felt was real and true and worth giving up everything for. I offered to run away with him. I offered to leave my husband, my family, and my whole life behind, but he turned me down. He said I was confusing temporary infatuation with real feelings. He said I was romanticizing something that would end in violence and death. He was right, but the fact that I could feel those things, that I could be willing to destroy my life for an enslaved man, means that something is fundamentally wrong, either wrong with me or wrong with the system that made this situation possible. The courtroom exploded. Judge Thibodeau hit the bench with his gavel over and over again to get everyone's attention. Vivian went on when the silence came back. I don't think I was under any kind of spell or influence. I think I was faced with something that our society doesn't know how to deal with. Being genuinely attracted to someone I'm supposed to see as property. Instead of admitting that this shows problems with how we categorize people, we're putting that person on trial for the crime of existing in a way that makes us question our assumptions. Vivian wasn't done, even though Cross tried to cut in. This trial is a joke. We're here because my husband's pride was hurt and Mr. DeVoe's authority was questioned. But the real question that no one wants to ask is this: why do we have to maintain our racial hierarchy through law, violence, and constant reinforcement if white supremacy is natural and unavoidable? Why does it take so much work to keep it up? Judge Thibodeau spoke up. Mrs. DeSamp, you're here to talk about specific events, not to give your opinion on social issues. The specific events only make sense as social commentary, Your Honor. That's the whole point. She was let go from the stand. Lauron didn't look at her as she walked by him and out of the courtroom. They would get a divorce within a year, which would be one of the first contested divorces in Louisiana history. Vivian would move to Philadelphia, where she would eventually become involved in abolitionist circles. However, she would never talk about what happened in Baton Rouge in public. Clement Rousseau, Matthias's lawyer, gave a different kind of defense. Instead of saying that Jules had caused trouble, Rousseau said that the people who couldn't control their own reactions were to blame. Jules had not gone after anyone, had not tried to get attention, and had even tried to get people to stop paying attention. If free white women were interested in an enslaved man, it was because they were morally wrong, not because his owner was careless. The horror in that Baton Rouge courtroom gets worse just when we thought we'd seen it all. If this story is giving you the creeps, send this video to a friend who likes dark mysteries. If you like what we do, hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's find out what happens next together. Rousseau also said that Lauron's own actions, trying to kill Matthias and setting up a vigilante group to break the law, showed that the real threat to social order came from men who couldn't accept the law and the right way to do things. The shooting, the committee's plans to raid, and the violence against Benjamin were the real crimes, not Jules's quiet life. Rousseau then called his main witness, Jules himself. When Jules came in, the courtroom went completely quiet. Matthias gave him simple but clean clothes to wear. He walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, and his hands were not tied. This had never happened before. A slave giving testimony in a civil case between white men, with his words being recorded as proof and his point of view being seen as important to the case. Judge Thibodeau had a hard time deciding whether to let this testimony in. In some cases, enslaved people could testify in court, but their testimony was usually given less weight than that of free people. But this case was very unusual in every way, and Thibodeau had decided that not including Jules's point of view would make the whole thing incomplete. Rousseau asked Jules questions that were carefully thought out to show what kind of person he was and how little control he had over the situation. Jules spoke in that educated voice that made everyone who heard it uneasy. He spoke clearly and without showing any emotion. "I did not ask Mr. Deveau to buy me. I did not ask for the physical traits I was born with. I did not encourage Mrs. Desamp's attention, and I explicitly rejected her offer. I have spent my whole life trying to be invisible and avoid the kind of trouble that this trial represents. My existence is not an action, it is simply a fact. If that fact causes problems for free people, I would respectfully suggest that the problem may not be with me, but with the system that needs to dehumanize me to work. Have you ever tried to seduce or persuade Mrs. Desamp or any other white woman? No. Did you ever want Mrs. Desamp or any other white woman? No. Did you ever do anything that could be seen as encouraging unwanted attention? I did what I was told to do at the places I was assigned to work and tried to stay out of sight. If my appearance alone is an action, then I am guilty just by being there, and there is no way to defend myself." Cross examined Jules harshly, trying to get him to admit some guilt or show that he was intentionally manipulating the situation. But Jules stayed calm. His answers were always the same, and his logic was sound. Cross once asked, "Do you know that being in this community has caused a lot of damage?" "I know that how people react to me has hurt them. I can't control how they choose to react to me." "Are you saying that Mrs. Desamp was completely responsible for her actions?" "I'm saying that saying my influence led to her choices takes away her freedom and humanity. She made choices, as did her husband and everyone else involved. I am the only person here who didn't have a choice about any of it." The testimony went on for 3 hours. By the end, the courtroom was split between people who were angry at Jules's intelligence and eloquence, which went against what they thought about the abilities of enslaved people, and those who were quietly, uncomfortably moved by the logic of his arguments. Before the closing arguments, Judge Thibodeau called a break. Catherine Deveau came up to Matthias in the hallway outside the courtroom during that break. "You have to let him go," she said. "That's not possible." "Why not? You heard everything he said. How can you say you own him after hearing all that?" "Because the other option is to admit that everything we've built is based on a lie, and that this whole system is wrong." "I can't do that, Catherine. It would kill me." "Can't you see that it's already ruining you?" Matthias left without saying anything. After Jules's testimony, the closing arguments were a letdown. Cross asked for damages, punishment, and public shame. Rousseau wanted Laurent to be fired, to file a countersuit, and to be found guilty of wrongdoing the whole time. Judge Thibodeau wrote down a lot of information, but his face didn't show it. 3 days later, the jury came back with a decision. Judge Thibodeau's written decision was 23 pages long. It was a carefully thought-out document that didn't fully please anyone but let everyone claim a small victory. The main conclusion was that Matthias Deveau had not been careless in how he took care of Jules. The man who owned the slave did nothing wrong, and it was not fair to hold him responsible for how other people reacted. Laurent's case was thrown out. Thibodeau also made a list of suggestions that would become parish policy. These included special rules for enslaved people with unusual traits that could cause problems in society, such as limited movement, limited interaction with free people, and more supervision. Property owners were told to think about whether these people should stay in the community or be moved to places where their presence would cause less trouble. It was a perfect compromise in court. Matthias won the case but lost the principle. Laurent lost the case, but the system got stronger. And Jules stayed a slave, but he was proven to be innocent. Everyone was unhappy, which probably meant that the choice was as fair as it could be given the situation. The immediate aftermath was quick and violent. Matthias sold Jules to a cotton broker from Natchez for $900, which was $300 less than what he had paid for him in Charleston. Jules was taken up the Mississippi River, where he disappeared into the huge machinery of the interstate slave trade. Matthias told himself that this was a business decision, and that Jules's staying would make things harder, but everyone knew it was an act of cowardice. Matthias couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of still owning Jules after defending his right to live. Laurent and Vivian's divorce was final in November 1845. Laurent never married again, grew more and more alone, and drank himself to death by 1851. Vivian lived until 1889. In Philadelphia, she worked with groups that wanted to end slavery. After the Civil War, she worked with groups that wanted to help freed slaves get an education in the South. She never talked about what happened in 1845 in public, but she did write a letter to Jules that she never sent. In it, she said, "You showed me that my gilded cage was still a cage. I will spend the rest of my life trying to break other cages open, because that's the only way I can honor what you taught me." The Committee for Preservation of Natural Order fell apart within a year because of fights between its members and the public's knowledge of what they were doing. A few members were publicly shamed for taking part in the planned raid, but no one was ever charged with a crime. Catherine Devou was never married. She stayed at the family plantation until her father died in 1859. After that, she moved to New Orleans, where she ran the family's business interests with ruthless efficiency. She quietly gave money to the Underground Railroad during the Civil War, but she publicly supported the Confederacy. A personal diary that was found in the 1930s had this entry from April 1845. "I have been taught my whole life that enslaved people are inferior, childlike, and unable to think clearly. Then I heard one speak with more moral clarity than anyone I've ever known. Everything I believed was a lie. I don't know how to live with that knowledge, but I can't forget it." We don't know much about what happened to Jules after he left Baton Rouge. Records show that he was sold 2 more times, once in Natchez in 1846 and once in Memphis in 1847. After that, the trail goes cold. Some historians think he might have gotten away during the Mexican-American War, maybe making it to Mexico or one of the northern free states. Some people think he might have died during one of the cholera outbreaks that hit the Mississippi River Valley in the late 1840s. Helen Caster, a researcher who was looking at antebellum court records in a storage room of the Louisiana State Archives in 1923, found one more piece to this story. She found a folder of papers about the Deschamps versus Devou case that had been put in the wrong place and forgotten. There was a single sheet of paper in Jules's handwriting among the usual legal papers. It seems like he wrote something while he was locked up in the root cellar at the Devou plantation before the trial. It read, "They will decide what happens to me, as they have decided everything about me since I was born. They will argue about who is responsible, who is at fault, who deserves compensation, but they will never ask the one question that matters. By what right do they own me at all? That question is too dangerous because once you ask it honestly, the entire structure collapses. So they will find some compromise that lets everyone save face, and I will be sold, or moved, or quietly disposed of, and life will continue as it always has. But I want to leave a record that I understood. I knew exactly what was happening and why, and I knew that their system was already dying, even if they couldn't see it yet." Every time someone like Mrs. Desamp questions the categories they've been taught, every time someone like Miss Catherine starts thinking instead of accepting, the foundation cracks a little more. I won't live to see it fall, but it will fall. Everything built on lies eventually does. The document was written on March 22, 1845, the day before Laurent was shot, and the day Benjamin came with his warning about the committee. Jules wrote it knowing he might not live to see the next 24 hours, and he hid it in the root cellar, where it stayed for decades, unread and forgotten. In 1924, Castere published the document in a journal article that most historians at the time didn't pay much attention to. However, it had a big impact on later civil rights research. We know the story today because it was mentioned in a footnote in a 1955 book about the history of law in Louisiana. The DeVoe plantation is still there. It became a museum in the 1960s. Tour guides talk about the 1845 scandal in vague terms, saying it was a complicated legal case involving enslaved people and social tensions, but they don't go into detail. The root cellar is closed off because it is thought to be structurally unsafe. In 1892, they tore down the carpentry shop. The parish courthouse where the trial took place burned down in 1861, taking most of its records with it. There are only a few scattered papers, private diaries, letters, and one man's written proof of his own humanity in a system that was meant to deny it. This mystery shows us how a society that built itself on dehumanizing others could be in danger from something as simple as seeing humanity in a new way. Beauty broke down everything the antebellum South said it believed about natural hierarchies and being better than others. What do you think of this tale? Do you think everything was revealed, or are there still deeper truths hidden in those locked files? Please leave a comment below. If you like this story and want to read more horror stories like it, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell a friend who likes